Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at multiplying and dividing rational expressions. Now, in this video, I'm going to be showing you the steps that you normally have to go to when you have to multiply these questions. Now, obviously, in any one of these questions, whether you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, they always ask you to find your restrictions as well. Now, to find your restrictions, surprise, surprise, you'd have to multiply. Well, you'd have to factor, sorry. So, first step is to factor. You always factor first. So, can't factor here. But over here, I can turn this into x plus 2, x minus 2. Okay? Now, to find your restrictions have to come before you've done any multiplication. So from the original. Okay, and to do that, obviously you look at your denominators. So in this case, I can say that x cannot be negative 4, x cannot be negative 2, and 2. So in total, x cannot be negative 4, negative 2, and 2. Okay? The next thing you want to do before you multiply, now keep in mind this is all before you multiply, it's to make your job easier, believe me, you don't want to multiply right now, is to simplify. Okay, and I notice that I have an x plus 2 on the bottom here, and an x plus 2 here, so twinsies. This would leave me with 1 over x plus 4 multiplied by x minus 3 over x plus 2, x minus 2. Okay? And finally, the fourth and last step is to multiply. Now, obviously, when you multiply fractions, if you remember, if I have 2 over 3 multiplied by 4 over 5, well, the top multiplies the top, and the bottom multiplies the bottom. So, you multiply numerator with numerator, so top with top, bottom with bottom. Okay, so that's going to give me, obviously if I'm following my steps, you make sure you always have your equals. And finally, 1 times x minus 3, well, remember it distributes. So 1 times x is x, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. And on the bottom, well, you could expand this, but you always want to simplify, so you could just leave it as its factored form of x plus 4, x plus 2, and x minus 2. And that's it. Obviously, at this point, your last step would be to simplify more if you can. But we can't, because if I'm looking here, if I'm looking at the top and the bottom, there is no x minus 3 on the bottom, so we're good. This is the final answer. Let's do another example. So in this example, we're going to look at what happens when we do division. Now, just in case people forgot this point here, now remember if we had done 1 divided by 1 over 3, for instance. The rule says that when you divide by a fraction, this is the same thing as saying 1, the one on the top, multiplied by the reciprocal. So that would be 1 times 3, which is 3. 3 over 1, yeah, that's 3. So the same rule applies here. Obviously, it's going to follow the same steps as before. Remember, you're going to... So, number one, factor. You're always factoring first so you can find your restrictions. So you're going to have x plus 3, x minus 3, x plus 2, x plus 3, x minus 2. Okay? So, now before you can find your restrictions, you're going to have to flip. So your second step is to multiply by the reciprocal. The other expression. What does that mean, basically, is that x minus 2 will go to the top, x plus 3 will go to the bottom, giving me x plus 3, x minus 3, remember I'm not touching this one, because this is on the top, multiplied by the reciprocal, which is x minus 2, over x plus 3. Once you've done the reciprocal, then you can find your restrictions. Remember, the restriction comes from your original function. So, in this case, you have x plus 2, x plus 3. So, x cannot be negative 2 and negative 3. Now you simplify as you usually do. Simplify. And multiply. Top to top, just like before, bottom to bottom. Okay, so that's going to be equal to, well, this is going to be a little bit more difficult unless you realize that x plus 3 on the bottom here is going to cancel out with an x plus 3 on the top there. In which case, you're only going to have an x plus 2 on the bottom. And on the top, you're going to have x minus 3, x minus 2. And that's the final answer. Alrighty, so let's look at a final example. This will be a little bit more of a challenging example, but all you need to do is follow the steps like we normally would do. So I want you to factor and then flip. So let's factor. So can't touch my top here. It's still going to be x minus 4. On the bottom, I'm going to realize that x squared minus x minus 30. Use whatever concept you want to use. If you want to use cross rule or any other rule, either way, when you factor them, you should get x minus 6 and x plus 5. Why? Because minus 6 times 5 is minus 30, and minus 6 plus 5 is negative 1. And then you're going to be dividing it by, I'm already going to flip this. I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to put this down here. So I'm going to erase this multiplication and turn it into a multiplication. I realized I just said multiplication twice. I'm erasing the division and putting a multiplication. So what do? We are going to factor. So this should be 4, because I realize 4 can divide both of them, which leaves me with x minus 6. And on the bottom, well, you have x squared minus 8x plus 16. Well, what numbers multiply? Use whatever method you want. You should get x minus, what are you going to get? X minus 4 and x minus 4. Well, that's just x minus 4 squared, which, if you use the perfect square rule, you should also realize this as well. So with that in mind, we have an x minus 4, x minus 4, x minus 6 on the top. So let's see what we can cancel out. I have an x minus 6 on the bottom, which cancels out with x minus 6 on the top. I have one x minus 4 cancel out with another x minus 4 on the top. Remember, twinsies. So that's going to give me 1 over x plus 5 multiplied by 4 over x minus 4. And then you multiply them out. 1 times 4 is 4. X plus 5, x minus 4. Now, obviously, there is one step I forgot to do, and that is at the beginning, I did not give my restricted terms. So remember, to get your restricted terms, you look at this point. So I know that my x cannot be 4, can't be 6, and it can't be -5. Now remember, please try to write them in order, so you should be writing them as this. Okay? Now obviously, there is 2 4s, but you only need to write down 1. Remember, you use the same rules like we use when we write domain. You don't repeat. And that's it. I hope this has helped.